Na farachan ac yn mynd a sínig eidir irisloch agus práis. Irisloch a húvan urim a húg sif gón cúine gléag na gael clúteoch a húch am an cogad na sémasoch. Agus práis a húvan dlestanis a bhúlig sif orm a bhí ruchga húg common Gàidhlig in nish ag shervish cúine chi blár Culloden. Le carachim ar bialah agus rún uach neoch tíar fór cór. Ha sin nula móachol an tuitime seo a ha síalag sías húcin han a líntjan von jeref lá sa gíblin seach ciatíag daigid sa sia. Go jevintje si droch lá bhaun. An gael gach túv din 3 agus mar sin ha coramach in a rís an dúg. Cúine úrachug na dúine fáintioch a chailen bear ag Culloden agus an cárachug a súr. We are commemorating the event 270 years ago today, the last battle of the 45, which was by any measure a cataclysmic and catastrophic turning point in Scottish and Highland history. The battle was an awful closure to the long-running episode of the Jacobite Wars, in which the Gaels were sometimes willing, sometimes reluctant participants. Every generation, it is said, should rewrite its nation's history, and the Battle of Culloden gives huge scope for revisiting the subject, the reasons for the battle, long and short-term causes and effects, and the lessons of history about instigating a civil war and about its victims, and how this can be resolved. Almost as we speak, another book on the 45 is being published. Jacqueline Riding's Jacobites, A New History of the 45 Rebellion from Bloomsbury Publishing. Many of us may have a personal reason for exploring these matters and visiting the battlefield. My great-great-great-great-grandfather's brother, David Hunter, was here with the Jacobite army 270 years ago. He survived and escaped abroad. We read about the hopelessness of the pitched battle on this open moorland, the chronicle of events leading up to it and the campaign that preceded it, the raising of the standard at Glenfinnan, strategy and tactics of the autumn campaign and the march south to Derby. Such events invite speculation over the ifs of history, if the Jacobites had carried on the 125 miles to London. The motives of Gaels in 1745 were complex, but the so-called Stuart cause is a historical complex, and our understanding may be distracted by the notion and attractions of a cause. To begin to try to explain the events of April 1746, whether to yourself or to others, we have a steepish hill to climb. Popular views have been formed under the influence of authors and playwrights and the literary wizards of the 19th and 20th centuries. In the afterglow of the Romantic movement, there was an obsession with the 45 as glorious episode or heroic adventure, and Bonnie Prince Charlie as the rash adventurer. Tourist literature brimmed with formulae such as typically Prince Charlie's country applied to Lochaber, an area as it happened blighted by the events of Charlie's year. By contrast, the late Callum MacLean in his resounding work The Highlands, published by oral tradition very unwillingly by Batsford in 1959, he wrote, "One would expect that in this area there would still be stories and traditions about the 45 and Prince Charlie. Strange to say, there is not so very much. Since the last Jacobite war unleashed such devastation on the district, it is not surprising that local tradition is muted. Alistair MacLeister Alistair despaired for the noch gisboch utwúdjert, the naked and poor of Moidart. And his cousin Ian Frango, French John, commented laconically on the prince's final departure from Arasig on the 20th September 1746. Quote, "He left us all in a worse state than he found us." Humour may thrive in adversity, and one joke is still with us. As Callum MacLean wrote, "There are hundreds of Prince Charlie's caves that the royal fugitive never saw." When the mapmakers of the Ordnance Survey Royal Engineers toured Inverness in the 1870s, they dutifully marked up Prince Charlie's cave in response to evidently fulsome information on the ubiquitous footfall of Prince Charles Edward Stuart. In the nature of such an event as Culloden, we as a nation are too used to foreshortened, even flawed versions of the battle, its preludes and its aftermath. For visitors to the site, huge strides have now been made for the better explanation and interpretation of the battle. The Culloden Visitor Centre opened officially 8 years ago today. It's the brainchild of the National Trust for Scotland and included the restoration of the battlefield to what we see now. The core narrative is first-rate, and effective advantage is taken of today's interpretive techniques. Above all, and taking the standpoint of the Gaelic Society of Inverness, Scottish Gaelic is introduced competently and confidently in the displays and used extensively to make it clear that this was a national language and more or less the lingua franca of the Jacobite army. This also makes clear that the language and literature of Gaelic Scotland furnishes history with real substance, and it would be an interesting and, I dare say, challenging exercise to lay the grand narrative of Scottish and British history to one side and compile a new history of the 45 on the basis of Gaelic and Gaelic-derived sources. Given the course and consequences of the 45, this would introduce a fresh emphasis in the narrative and give to the people of the Highlands and Islands a history which speaks for them rather than one composed at a distance and imposed on them. Gaelic was spoken on both sides of the conflict. Incidents in the campaign hinged on mutual intelligibility, such as the so-called Rout of Moy on the night of 16th of February 1746. Alistair MacFeister Alistair, Alexander MacDonald of Dalloway, Moyded, the most prolific of the poets, gave vivid voice to the ideals and high hopes of the Gaels in the 45, as did John Roy Stewart. Donnacha Ban MacIntyre is perhaps the best example of a poet in the Hanoverian army, who yet took a more traditional Jacobite line. His was one of the voices which cursed the Hanoverians for their indiscriminate penalising by the Disclothing Act, loyal and rebel clans alike. The first move in an adjustment of Highland history towards an understanding of the Gaelic voice came in 1933 with the late Dr. John Lone Campbell's Highland Songs of the 45. This work revealed a political awareness and acumen far in advance of local and clan-bound traditional allegiances. Powerful concepts were brought into play, such as messianic hopes for the restoration of the Stuarts and of a pan-Gaelic kingdom. Though this was in effect the last battle, Jacobitism had also been the vehicle for a prophecy of a different last battle as ultimate victory for the Gaels. This is the repeated element of Thomas the Rhymer traditions in Scottish Gaelic and formerly an important part of the cultural life of the Gael. Thomas the Rhymer lies sleeping in Tomnahurich above Inverness with his men-at-arms and his white horses awaiting the apocalyptic summons. He would become mortal again and lead the Gaels to victory. This sense of hope, even of redemption, should fire our curiosity to consider the history of the Highlands and Islands. If we were standing here on the threshold of the 18th as opposed to the 21st century, we would be in the midst of a culture that had taken its place among the nations of Europe, a culture at its most confident, successful and assertive, to become arguably the most decisive factor in 17th and 18th century British history. If it was not this, a vengeful government might not have taken such steps to destroy it. The example has for too long held, with the sorry state of civil and religious wars, interruptions to trade and commerce, economic stagnation and famines and epidemics. In the same context, intellectual or artistic endeavours, including, say, music, are ignored before the sunburst of the Enlightenment. Gaelic culture and society has tended to be omitted from the discourse, apart from the briefest of aperçus, when the Highlander rudely invades the stage of British politics, and Gaelic culture too often viewed retrospectively through the defining lenses of economic determinism, clearance and romanticism. By remembering what has been on this battlefield, we can honour our forebears. But 270 years after the event, we can build on this remembrance by looking forward with hope and optimism. It's only myth, a hashin could clach eile a cairn ache, a feikin tiondag eile ri cuilan orstan, agus a geisteoch le kins na a sinchen a laurst tron a lintje.
Tafel.